try and play this for your benefit, because this is one of the earliest, slightly better clips. And this is Dil Ki Rani. How this also shows how poetry is important in cinema, and how poetry and literature in general is important for radio. Sorry, this is Aparadhi. love song being broadcast, and Madhubala is singing. And this guy who's a physical instructor, who teaches, who's a physical instructor teacher in a college. He is absolutely fascinated by her. He pursues her aggressively, and they marry. But he then asks her not to work on radio. He's a bit jealous. Also, Pran, who comes to live with them. Pran, who's a freedom fighter, and so there's an altercation between husband and wife. She's kicked out of the house. She has a kid also. She goes back to her father's house, who's blind. So she goes back to radio to support herself after their divorce. And when she starts singing. He is very angry, and then he breaks this radio, a radio which he loves. He takes an imprint of her name. Once he writes her name on this radio piece, he takes an imprint on his cheek. He is so much in love with her to begin with, but he starts hating her, and after that, a divorce, and then he breaks the radio, breaks it in 3 installments. He's so angry. Okay, once again, you can see who's the same person. When he's in love with radio, is the hero. When he hates the radio, it becomes a villain. Okay, and it also shows the kind of social attitude that people had. This is the film in which Madhubala uses radio to place Puja ki Thal and Raksha Bandhan ki Thal on it. Okay, so it's very important for my argument. Okay, now I start with 3 quotes. Sehgal in Dushman, the film that I referred to, he says, "Radio se mujhe ishq hai." That's a huge statement to make for Sehgal, because he's a singer, but he is also the protagonist, right? And obviously, it's important that radio be popularized in colonial times in 1939. Okay. Cine music is Lord Indra's horse, and Akashvani respects it. This is 1967. In between, there is a ban on film songs for 5 years, and people then force, because they start buying, radio sets, and before buying radio sets, they ask the shop owners whether a particular radio set plays Radio Ceylon or not. And when they are told, yes, it does, only then they buy that particular radio set. Okay, so that's very interesting. So Vivid Bharati is formed. Vivid Bharati as a channel on radio comes alive to play film songs once again, like it was done before 1952. So it was a victory of the people who wanted to continue listening to film songs, and they could do so on All India Radio now once again. Okay. So Narendra Sharma, who's a very important figure at All India Radio, and who guided the process of Vivid Bharati, who gave it its name, and who also led its program content. So Pandit Narendra Sharma, who's a film lyricist and who was a freedom fighter himself, and who was a secretary of Indian National Congress. So and a poet, of course, great poet of Hindi. So he says in Madhuri, in a piece written for Madhuri, "Cine music is Lord Indra's horse, and Akashvani respects it." That means that there's a come around, right? That establishment, Akashvani, has come around to respect people's choices and film music in general. Now, if you look at a statement by Leeladhar Mandloi, Leeladhar Mandloi is saying this in 2013. He says, "We may say that without radio as supportive company, the 100-year-old history of cinema might not have been so glorious." So now the whole history has changed. By 2013, the poet as well as Director General at All India Radio, they have no qualms he has no qualms in accepting that the close connection, the close affinity between radio and cinema has really been historic and glorious. Okay, Manohar Mahajan, who was very important, who was trained by Amin Sayani, and he says the relations between India and Pakistan were not quite cordial back then, but the music played from Radio Ceylon had kept the ties between the two countries alive. Very interesting. How radio played an important role in uniting the listeners of India and Pakistan. We keep talking about third track, fourth track, diplomacy, etc., etc. Here is radio, which played that role. And there's a third country, Sri Lanka, which is crucial in this whole business of bringing the listeners of two countries together. So you have several names then in the next quote. Jhumri Tilaiya se Rameshwar Barnwal. Jhumri Tilaiya is a place which acquires mythic proportions because you have a dedicated band of listeners who keep sending letters of farmaishes, postcards, and farmaish letters to all radio stations, including Radio Ceylon, and it becomes very famous. And other small towns that nobody would know about otherwise come alive following the fame of Jhumri Tilaiya, so to speak. So Kanpur, Aligarh, Badka Kana, and these listeners are very important as far as radio is concerned. They create instruments of their immortality. They create their names. They create names as listeners by bringing out a lot of booklets, magazines, which Vibhuti Duggal has talked about. Okay, so it's very important that these names, these names of listeners, have left records for us. Of course, here is a cartoon from the time when film songs were banned. This is from Shankar's Weekly. This is a cartoon which tells us about how government is trying to. Keskar Sahab is one who's handing over particular kind of dress to the heroine, who's apparently is wearing Western dress, and she's being handed over sari, etc., and blouse, which is Indian. And of course, Pant Sahab cannot even look at this woman in this dress. So that shows how government is anxious about woman's body and what she should wear, etc., etc. Here are some more cartoons from Shankar's Weekly. Keskar wants classical music. Keskar banned it also because he wanted classical music to be promoted, and he did everything to promote classical music. Everybody takes note of that. Every historian of radio and music says that he played a pivotal role in that. Okay, so Keskar says state has replaced princes as patrons of art. His Highness is very generous. This is a satirical take by Shankar's Weekly. Okay. Also, these are television sets, a heap of television sets, and Keskar is singing from there, or maybe radio sets, and Keskar is speaking from the microphone, and he says, "My voice is the voice of 1,000," because he says that 25,000 more radio receivers were going to be installed for community listening. So because it was expensive, gramophone records were very expensive, gramophone was very expensive, radio was also very expensive in 1950s. So Keskar says that he would, help communities, village communities, panchayats, install radio sets so that they could listen to programs, government programs. So the satire here, the take of Shankar's Weekly is that, look, you are also trying to monopolize. It's you whose voice is going to be broadcast through all these channels, through all these radio sets. Okay. This is a cartoon published in Film India. And you see Babu Rao Patel, who's the editor, and his wife. She was also the co-editor of the magazine. And there used to be a column of letters to the editor. The question is asked by somebody from in Madras, does Moti is the dog who's listening, okay? Does Moti like the classical music of AIR? Classical music became a butt of ridicule between 1952 to 1957, as you can see. No, this one says, Patel says that no decent dog likes it. Classical music, which is being broadcast by. So there was a critique all around. And he says, of course, in future, please address him as Sri Moti. He cannot be called as called Moti. Okay. So here is is a Sapera who's not playing a bean. He's playing radio. Okay. And he's saying he's very civilized Huzur. He dances only to film music. Another example of how popular film music has become. Okay. As I said, there are criticisms all around. Tirkekar is writing Quest in 1956-57. About music too, there is misunderstanding of the problem and mishandling of the situation when film music was banned, right? It is the policy of AIR to discourage what is known as film music and popularize the classical variety. The way chosen for implementing the policy was anything but tactful. Launching a tirade against film songs was the surest way of making them more popular than they would have been otherwise. The result of this official opposition to film music was the greatest surprise to AIR. Film songs were patronized by a newly organized group of listeners. Loudspeakers were put into commission to play film songs. And an outside agency that is broadcasting recorded music to India expanded its transmitting activity to play more film songs, which is what? It is Radio Ceylon. By banning it, like the forbidden fruit, the film music was made the sweeter. Little did AIR realize that the catchy tunes and lilting music could pave the way for a love of classical music. Okay? On the whole, the result of AIR's partial ban on film songs seems to be the increased popularity of an outside broadcasting agency at the cost of AIR. Okay? Another interesting point that Tirkekar is making here is that cinema itself had become the space where music directors like Naushad, music directors like C. Ramchandra, music directors like S.D. Burman, others were using a lot of classical music to make their tunes for film songs. So cinema itself becomes the conduit, right, for classical music. This is something that was missed by Keskar, who tried to create this false opposition between film music and classical music. Here is an example of hypocrisy, government hypocrisy. Here is, music in the park. Radio was played in the park. And he's saying, why don't you play some music before? If there is music, people will gather and then Netaji can address the people, right? So they needed music to get people. But they were not ready to allow music on All India Radio, that is film music. So this is another cartoon in Shankar's Weekly. You can see that Keskar is playing below the banner AIR musical program, and you have Radio Ceylon and Radio Goa, two ladies representing those stations that were playing film songs, basically. And you have the same audience, right? So all the audience, they are not listening or looking at Keskar. They have turned away from Keskar. This is a very good visualization of a listening event that is stretched across several years in the 1950s until Vivid Bharati was set up. And Vivid Bharati started winning back the audience that it had lost to Radio Ceylon. This is another representation of the popularity of radio and the togetherness, actually, of the two. So there were Sunil Dutt, many of you might know, worked for Radio Ceylon before he became a film star in Bombay. And so you see a film called Pyasi Sham being advertised in the pages of Madhuri and I thank National Film Archives of India for this image. So Murphy Vikreta ko Sharmila Tagore se pyar ho gaya. Murphy radio is very important. As transistor, you can see that it has become small already. It's not as big as it used to be. And so Sharmila Tagore falls in love with this seller of radios, and the two come together. Okay, so it's very interesting. Here is another friend of Kishore Kumar's, and they are in college, as is Pran. Pran is the villain. Pran has got Kishore Kumar implicated in a murder case. And he believes that he is going to be jailed. So the whole party is celebrating here. But before that, I.S. Johar, who's a lawyer, and he comes here to this building, to Pran's house, to investigate, to see if there is any evidence of Pran being the culprit, actually, which he is. Okay, so he has come here to gather evidence. And as soon as he realizes that Pran and party are coming, Asit Sen and Harendranath Chattopadhyay and the three girls, radio was used also as an instrument for entertainment and mass party. Okay, so you can see that radio is being used for that. So as soon as they realize that these villains are coming in, they hide. Johar and his girlfriend, they hide behind the radio, and they have to pretend that radio is actually working. Okay, so they have to perform because they want to, Pran and others want to run the radio. And how they, do this impromptu broadcasting from behind the radio is hilarious. In the make-believe world of cinema, you have to believe that these people are drunk and they believe that it's actually happening from the original radio stations that they want to listen to. Okay, and so you can see Johar and his friend taking on various linguistic roles. So language once again comes into play, but also towards the end, radio sonorities, which comes into the picture.
माफ कीजिएगा.
अच्छा मिस्टर प्राण,
अद्भुत है ये क्लिप. India is a diverse country, and All India Radio has to address its linguistic diversity. People have linguistic expectations from All India Radio, and they are therefore want to listen to programs in their own languages. Okay, that is what is happening in this clip. So Madrasi and what does a North Indian do who's caught in this kind of situation, which I.S. Johar is? So what does he do? He does not know other languages. Most North Indians don't know other languages. Huh? Very interesting. So, but there is something that is common, cinema. So there are names of people who are producers, directors, and actors and actresses. They are known to everybody. So that using those names, the Qawwali continues in different languages. Same formula is replicated in Bangla and in Tamil. Okay, it's very interesting. But when the girls say that no, radio Ceylon, then they don't have to think twice. Language is not a handicap. It's a commercial, it's a jingle they break into all of a sudden. Jaldi le lo, That's what the claim of fame for Radio Ceylon was, that it is a commercial radio. Vividh Bharati was set up in 1957, all right, but it took another 10 years. 1967 was the year when it went commercial. So another 10 years were wasted, of airtime was wasted when government could have earned a lot of money. Why they did not do it, why did they take so much time, is something that we need to investigate historically. So now you have a wonderful history of Radio Ceylon, history of broadcasting, history of listening, history of memories, history of creativity, history of relationship between broadcasters and listeners, very close relationship between the two. And this we owe to all these people. Vijay Kishore Dubey, who was the person who went there and set up the library. Gopal Sharma, who went there with his own memory of film songs. And then Manohar Mahajan. Before that, of course, Amin Sayani gave it a huge popularity. Sitting in Bombay, he was not the person broadcasting from Radio Ceylon. He didn't go to Sri Lanka for any regular job. He used to tape Geet Mala programs at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, and dispatch those tapes. And those tapes were broadcast on Wednesdays. And then also every week, every month, and every year, you had the Geet Mala toppers, Sartaj Geet, 32 Paidan, Pehle 16 Paidan, and so on and so forth. It was a suspense. It was a musical, suspenseful drama that he created. Of course, he used a lot of beautiful words to connect one broadcast, one song to another. He had some insider story of the film world, which he used to good effect. Okay, and on the right hand side on the screen, you see Jhumri Taleya, Majnu Ka Tila, which is very much in Delhi, Badka Kana, which is in Jharkhand now, Yavatmal, which is in Maharashtra. So all these small little places came alive on the sonic map of the world, which is a global map. Little towns and cinema, film songs, film music, and its various packages were the ways that brought them together, were the excuses for these diverse places and their listeners and broadcasters to have come together. So it's another history. You can read it. Here is one very fun take by Sharad Joshi. Sharad Joshi was a renowned satirist in Hindi, Vyangyakar. He wrote a piece on Jhumri Tilaya in Madhuri, the film magazine, edited by Arvind Kumar. So this is great fun. I'll read it out. झुमरी तलैया फिल्म गीत की अमरता की प्रथम और अंतिम गारंटी। बंबई से झुमरी तलैया तक जो स्वर रेखा खींची हुई है, वही इस देश का असल सांस्कृतिक बंधन है, राष्ट्र की भावनात्मक एकता का अंतिम प्रमाण है। जब तक इस देश में चांद, सूरज और झुमरी तलैया विद्यमान है, हल्के फुल्के गीतों का वर्तमान सब पर भारी रहेगा। हल्के फुल्के लाइट सॉन्ग्स एज अगेंस्ट क्लासिकल सॉन्ग्स, उनको पक्के गीत कहा जाता था, है ना। भविष्य सुरक्षित। फरमाइश तेरा नाम झुमरी तलैया है। झुमरी तलैया, तू व्यर्थ के गीतों की सार्थक आत्मा है, तू निरर्थक को अर्थ प्रदान करने वाली शक्ति है। गीतों के हर बख्शी को तुझसे आनंद की अनुभूति होती है। हर जयपुरी की तू हसरत है, हर सुल्तानपुरी की तू मजरूह है, हर लुधियानवी की तू शायर है, हर कल्याण जी की तू आनंद जी है, हर मंगेशकर की लता है, आशा है। तू कहाँ है झुमरी तलैया, सारे शोर की किशोरावस्था तू कहाँ है ना। Wow. So wonderful passage where he takes a double take, right? On the one hand, he pays tribute to the immense popularity of film songs and immense dedication of listeners from Jhumri Tilaiya. And on the other hand, he also is a bit skeptical about how is it important for nation's life, right? Film songs. So what to do with it? Is it so vital? Is it so important, etc., etc.? So literatures with an agenda of their own, a sarthak agenda of their own, so to speak, right, had to come down heavily on as nirarthak a thing as a film song, which is there, the two sides of which any satire, tries to address, tries to walk between the two, parallel lines, is what a satire does, and that's what is being done in this beautiful piece. Here is another cartoon, two cartoons, and this was reproduced in Nai Dunya, I think, when they published Sargam Ka Safar. Yeah. So this man is dying. he has written farmaishes, postcards from Jumri all along, all his life. And he says to his, while dying, he tells his son, झुमरी तिलैया के लाल वचन दे कि मेरे बाद भी तो यह अखंड ज्योत जलाए रखेगा, आकाशवाणी पर फरमाइशी भेजता रहेगा. And he, and the song that is coming then is Chal Akela, right? Mukesh song, very. Tera mela piche chuta rahi chal akela. It's a parting kind of vachan that he extracts from his son. Please, keep sending those requests to Radio Salon. Here is another cartoon without any words. Jumre Tereya is a place the person is wearing a radio shirt, which means that he's immersed in radio and he's listening to gramophone record. Those gramophone records are coming back from radio. How are they coming back? They are transformed. What is transformed? It's the postcards, the requests. Those get transformed as radio gramophone records. And so that is another beautiful visualization of the listening process. Okay, how do you visualize it? The gramophone record is traveling from radio to his ears, but it's not just traveling up to Jumre Tilaiya. There's a Hans which is flying. So a Hans actually flies can fly very far. So it is not just going up to Jumre Tilaiya, but the sound produced from Radio Ceylon, from any radio station that is playing film song, can travel far and wide and to other nations, other continents, etc. That's what is being happening. There's another clip which shows the importance of transportability, mobility of radio as a mechanical instrument, and also its attraction as a gift. Parents nowadays would gift mobiles to their children as gifts. Radio which was being used as gift items in 1960s. So I'll play this clip and then try to wind up very quickly. But this is for you to think of the literary interface of broadcasting, for example. How is literature important? And what form of literature is being broadcast from radio? And what kind of tensions, tussles are there as plays, as talks, as stories? And if you look at the Indian listener, which was the news, which was the fortnightly newsletter, actually, which was published by All India Radio. It was Akashwani later, and it was Sarang in Hindi, and also in Urdu, and in Bangla, in several languages, which used to detail the programs of the next fortnight. So if you look at those things that are available online these days, also on Google Play, you will see what was the range of programming, what is the range of programming that was being broadcast from different stations all over India. So that is a very good source, because we don't have recordings. We are a poor country, and we recorded new programs on the old tapes, okay, which means that we lost all of the older programs. We don't have such records. We have only printed records of the programs that were broadcast. That's the only thing we have. So we can, on the basis of that, we can write new histories of all these things: censorship, advertising, broadcasting is a creative profession, humor, etc., etc., etc. Jaimala. There are endless possibilities. We can, what kind of experiments were made in classical music? What was pedagogy? Instrumental pedagogy. Songs were also broadcast as instrumentals. So we heard songs on guitar, on violin, and on mandolin, and all kinds of things. There were language issues, as I pointed out. 50s, 60s, 70s are marked by huge language ambitions of different regions and expectations and language politics. So states are reorganized on the basis of language, but that still leaves a lot of conflict. in the political zone, and it does affect radio. There are demonstrations against Vivid Bharati for broadcasting Hindi programs in the South, and there are demonstrations in Jaipur, for example, against cinema halls that are showing English films. So all kinds of electoral broadcasts are another very important thing that we should look at, and we should do a history of that, how politics, especially elections, and radio come together. And of course, radio during crisis, during partition, how Nehru actually prevented further bloodshed during partition, when he announced that it was a Hindu who killed Gandhi right in the time. Okay, and so there are several new areas we can explore. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture that you have given to us. It was full of information. We are very enlightened, sir. आपने बहुत सारे विषयों को उठाया. आपने बताया कि how the question of politics of language and region can also be, understood, and it should be more of, researched in the coming days. So आपने possibilities की तरफ भी हमारा ध्यान कराया. So one thing that you can, tell us about that the methodology one should go through while doing these kind of researches, because you see, we as a historian or the research scholars are not trained that fine in this regard of, oral history or, or getting information from several, places. So would you like to emphasize on that thing कि methodology के बारे में researcher इस तरह के अगर research करता है तो वो किस तरीके की शुरुआत करे और उसका क्या आइडिया रहे, या उसको इतने सारे sources में से उसको एक खास दिशा की तरफ कैसे ले जाए, because there are so many different kind of sources, and how should he be selecting one of them or two of them and be going towards that side. सर इस पर थोड़ा सा कुछ अगर बताना चाहें हमारे budding historians.
Right, Vikas. Look, what I have tried to do methodologically here is try to bring different media histories together. And I immediately realized that actually there cannot be one source. It is a history of cinema, it is a history of radio, but we also have to depend on print for this history, to write this history. So one, diversity of sources. Of course, I also talk to a whole lot of people. I talk to Amin Sayani. I talk to other broadcasters. I interacted with them through email, and I have gathered my evidence from various collectors, various listeners also, listeners with whom I traveled all the way to Radio Ceylon. So there is oral history, there is print, magazines. There are recordings of programs that some listeners have done, and they have kept it there on YouTube. So those I have used. So one is that you have to diversify. And of course, there are government resources, right? Fielden's report. So I have used every possible source that could be available to write this history and tell one story. So you have to, as a historian, you have to rise above your sources. You should know how to read your sources, of course. A government report is one way of telling us about particular situations. And then there are listeners' accounts that tell us something else. Then there is history of technology, from which we glean how radio is changing as a technological form, right? So I am trying to bring all these histories together to write just one narrative of intermediality of the two media forms coming together in the life of not just one nation, but several nations. So I have to cross several bridges, methodological bridges also, in order to write this history. Otherwise, it's not possible. So thanks. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yes. Of course, you have to take every source with a pinch of salt, right? We know there are biases in all sources. Government reports have certain biases. Listeners have their own biases. Okay, broadcasters would have their own biases. Those who loved Radio Ceylon have their own biases.
Bias.
Those who loved Muhammad Rafi have their own biases. Those who loved Amin Sayani have their own biases. And we have to, get above all these to write a better history, to write a balanced history of, of the times.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir.